Hi and welcome. I'm Andy Mioch and you are watching A News. Here are the headlines. Benjamin Netanyahu orders the IDF to carry out powerful attacks in Gaza. U.S. strikes against suspected drug vessels in the Pacific kill 14 alleged drug traffickers. Hurricane Melissa makes landfall in Jamaica after killing 7 across the Caribbean. Thank you for tuning in. We start in the Middle East, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the military to carry out powerful attacks in Gaza. The announcement from his office came after Netanyahu said Hamas committed a clear violation of the ceasefire deal, accusing the group of reburying remains and staging the return of hostages' bodies. We can bring you some live footage from the line separating Israel and Gaza, and with it some of the latest lines. The Reuters news agency and Hamas-run media say that Israeli planes have launched strikes on Gaza City. As of now, casualties are unknown. A bit earlier, Israeli public broadcaster Khan has reported that Israel decided to expand control over Gaza beyond the so-called Yellow Line in coordination with the United States. Hours earlier, there were reports of Palestinian militants firing on Israeli soldiers in southern Gaza, prompting strikes from the Israeli military. Before that, the Israelis claimed that the casket handed over by Hamas on Monday night contained partial remains of a hostage whose body was recovered by the military in December 2023. Additionally, they accused Hamas of staging a fake discovery of the remains in Gaza City in front of the Red Cross. Hamas has in turn said it will delay the handover of a hostage body after Israel announced plans to strike Gaza. The fragile ceasefire brokered by the United States came into effect on October 10th. It continued to hold in spite of repeated flare-ups of violence and accusations between Israel and Hamas on breaching the agreement. Of course, this is a developing story, and we'll bring you more as we have it. And now, as the situation unfolds, we're joined by Ana Maria Evans, a political analyst coming to us from Lisbon. Ana, thank you so much for being with us. What is your first take
Thank you, Andy.
on what we're seeing happening on the ground?
Well, what we are seeing is not a first event like this. So since the ceasefire, it has happened previously that Israel has felt the need to attack Gaza. And usually because, according to the government, Hamas has not complied with its promises with regard to the ceasefire. And so what we saw in the early hours was that, as you have mentioned, the return of hostage bodies has not complied with what was promised. And so this is one aspect of the ceasefire deal that has not been accomplished so far. What we know is that the Trump administration has played a very important role in trying to put pressure on Israel not to advance too much and resume control of Gaza, so as not to go back with the process of peace. However, we also know that there are very important elements that have not been decided upon with regard to a true peace treaty. Because we know, for example, that Hamas has not disarmed yet. And the disarmament of Hamas is a very important part of this peace process, and a demand that Israel is not willing to let go. And so, not only the hostage problem, the bodies that are not being returned and which constitute a breach of the ceasefire on the Hamas side, but also the fact that Hamas has not yet disarmed, and it is proving very complex to deal with the model of disarmament. And what we know from previous instances, the ongoing conflict between Hamas and Israel previous to the war that started after the 7th October invasion of Israel by Hamas, previous to the 7th of October, what we know is that Israel has always feared that Hamas will use its armament to build infrastructures that will allow it coordination at the military level, i.e., meaning a means to attack in an aggregated way. And this is always, the national security issue for Israel. Now, having said that, it is obvious that the radical factions of the government that provide support to Prime Minister Netanyahu are putting a lot of pressure because the radical factions never really agreed with the ceasefire and wanted the government to keep occupying Gaza, further than the yellow line, the so-called yellow line.
Now
And
that you
so,
mentioned these extreme
Netanyahu,
elements,
yeah.
we've heard certain Israeli ministers, such as the far-right National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, plead with Netanyahu to resume the war after the return of the living hostages. As things stand now, do you see a resumption of the full-blown conflict?
Well, Andy, not necessarily, because it depends on what Hamas will do next. We know that in ceasefire situations, there is a very fine line separating the possibility of returning to war. And this fine line is what worries all of us as analysts and obviously the population, because it is indeed a very fine line. Any small breach can end up in bigger disruptions and in a domino effect that ends up at war again. And we know this. All ceasefires have the issue of how much they will last, because any small spark can generate a fire, explosion and fire. And so we know this, but we also know that in previous instances and in different contexts, Israel has done military strikes after negotiating ceasefires, and that has not meant a full-blown war. So, for example, in Lebanon, it has happened sometimes, and in Syria as well. Now, the issue is whether, this is a show of force. So basically, Netanyahu is saying you're not complying fully with what was planned, and so we immediately show force. So the thing is this just a show of force, or will it go beyond the show of force and become an actual resuming of the conflict? I think that's the fine line. It is obviously a means to say we are strong and we are willing to go ahead, even though the United States might not agree. But that is a show, a demonstration, but that does not necessarily mean that on the field this demonstration will bring the field to the dramatic situation that we had before the ceasefire was negotiated. And we've seen that President Trump has been very cautious and prudent, and saying that Hamas needed time to find the equipment and to find the hostages corpses and the bodies. And so we know that President Trump does not want the war to resume and has,
Donald Trump is,
done a
as we
major
speak,
effort.
in his on his Asia tour, very tightly packed. Ever since this truce took hold, we've seen U.S. efforts on the ground with the envoys, the vice president, and the Secretary of State coming to Israel to shore up the ceasefire. How do you expect Washington to react if this flare-up indeed escalates and the war resumes?
Well, President Trump and his administration are really interested in maintaining the ceasefire. It is very clear that so much effort has been put into the negotiations of the ceasefire, and also preparations towards the next stage, which is the stage where international forces should be put on the ground to control the situation and to maintain peace. And there is a lot of work and diplomatic effort to find which kinds of countries, most probably Arab countries and Muslim countries, but that have acceptance from Israel, which countries will be part of these peace keeping forces. There has been so much investment on this second stage, and also on dealing with who is going to pay for the rebuilding effort, the reconstruction, and how will the reconstruction be modeled and be implemented. So with all this effort, it is very clear that the Trump administration does not want to drop the case and to allow the situation to unravel and go back to war again. So that's very clear. But obviously, President Trump also needs to keep his old ally and friend in the Middle East, which is Israel, in a good modus operandi. And so President Trump will always try to balance between the national security fears of the Israeli government and what has been promised in terms of a ceasefire. So President Trump will probably also say that we need to see how Hamas is going to behave and what to expect in the next few days.
Anna, thank you so much for joining us and providing us with your insights. Now, as this is a developing story, we will bring you the latest lines as soon as we get them. But for now, in other news, U.S. forces have killed 14 people in strikes on 4 alleged drug boats in the Pacific, according to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who said one survivor was rescued by Mexican search and rescue teams. This is the latest in a series of attacks on boats the U.S. says have been carrying drugs in both the Pacific and Caribbean. Hegseth said the strikes happened on Monday at the direction of President Donald Trump. At least 51 people have been killed to date in the strikes that led to an escalation of tensions between the U.S. and the governments of both Colombia and Venezuela. Hurricane Melissa has made landfall at New Hope in southwestern Jamaica, hitting the Caribbean island with winds of up to 300 kilometers per hour. It's the strongest storm on record to smash into the country. The U.S. National Hurricane Center has warned that parts of Jamaica could see rainfall of up to 100 centimeters and a life-threatening storm surge. The Red Cross warned that up to 1.5 million people are expected to be directly affected by the hurricane. As of now, 7 people have died. Nordic and EU leaders have met in Stockholm for the Nordic Council Summit, focusing on defense readiness and support for Ukraine amid rising hybrid threats across Europe. Let's have a look.
Nordic and European leaders have met in Stockholm for the Nordic Council Summit, pledging stronger regional defence cooperation and long-term support for Ukraine. The summit took place amid rising hybrid threats and airspace incursions across Europe.
This is a provocation. This is a hybrid threat, exactly like you just described, Mette, which we cannot tolerate. We will not tolerate any incursion in our airspace or our territory, and therefore building up this readiness roadmap is of vital interest.
Von der Leyen outlined a readiness roadmap with new defence plans, including the Eastern Flank Watch and a joint drone network, as leaders reaffirmed support for Ukraine and discussed using frozen Russian assets to fund its recovery.
We're in for the long haul. We are ready to cover the financing needs of Ukraine so that we are standing by Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said the Nordic countries take full responsibility for their own security, while Denmark's Mette Frederiksen warned that Russia seeks to divide and weaken European unity.
And I really like the idea that Russia pays for the damages they have done and committed in Ukraine. For me, there is no alternative to the reparation loan. Of course, we need to find a solution to some of the technical. This is not a question about giving money to Ukraine or to give donations to Ukraine. This is a way of defending Europe.
The summit ended with a call for unity against emerging threats and a shared pledge to strengthen NATO-EU cooperation.
Still with Ukraine, a UN Rights Commission has concluded that Russia's drone attacks on civilians in southeastern Ukraine constitute crimes against humanity and war crimes. The UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine found that Russian forces had systematically used drones to intentionally target civilians and civilian objects and cause harm and destruction. The report published this week says that more than 200 civilians have been killed in the southern Ukrainian regions of Dnipropetrovsk, Kherson and Mykolaiv since July 2024, while more than 2,000 were injured. Throughout the war, Russia has repeatedly denied accusations of targeting civilians. Oil prices fell today as the market reacted to supply and trade developments. Analysts say OPEC Plus plans to increase production, ongoing US-China trade talks, and continued Russian oil exports are keeping pressure on global oil prices.
Oil prices retreated on Tuesday as the OPEC announced plans to increase production, offsetting optimism over a potential trade deal between the United States and China. Brent crude was trading at $64.72 per barrel, down 0.64% from the previous close of $65.14, while US benchmark West Texas Intermediate fell 0.61% to $60.97. Analysts say investors are weighing progress in US-China trade talks against the broader supply outlook. OPEC and its allies, known as OPEC Plus, are expected to implement another modest output increase in December. The group, which long maintained production cuts to support the market, began gradually reversing them in April. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to meet on Thursday in South Korea. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told US Secretary of State Marco Rubio that Beijing hopes Washington will remain open to cooperation in preparation for high-level contacts. Amid these developments, Russian oil major Lukoil announced plans to sell its international assets, marking one of the most significant responses by a Russian company to Western sanctions since the war in Ukraine began in February 2022. Experts note that sanctions on oil exporting nations continue to influence global crude prices. Russian Energy Minister Sergei Tsivilev highlighted India's significant role in Russia's oil exports, saying shipments have remained strong this year. This robust supply has fueled concerns over a potential global oil glut, exerting downward pressure on prices. Speaking to local media, Tsivilev underlined that India remains a key energy partner for Russia. The United States, which imposed a 50% tariff on Indian imports of Russian oil as part of its sanctions, claimed that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi pledged to halt such purchases, a claim India has not confirmed. Market analysts say the combination of rising OPEC plus output, ongoing US-China trade negotiations and steady Russian oil exports is creating a complex backdrop for traders, keeping crude prices under pressure despite optimism over potential trade breakthroughs.
The United States and Japan have signed a new framework agreement to secure supplies of critical minerals and rare earth elements. The deal came as U.S. President Donald Trump visited Tokyo for talks on trade and security.
US President Donald Trump met with Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi in Tokyo on Tuesday during the second stop of his Asia diplomacy tour. The talk centered on trade, with both leaders signing a framework agreement aimed at securing the supply of critical minerals and rare earths through mining and processing. The two countries plan to collaborate using economic policy tools and coordinated investments to build more diversified markets for these essential materials. Security cooperation was also a key topic, with the two leaders signaling what they called a new golden age for the US-Japan alliance. Trump expressed his gratitude for the strong partnership.
On behalf of our country, I want to just let you know, anytime you have any question, any doubt, anything you want, any favors you need, anything I can do to help Japan, we will be there. We are an ally at the strongest level.
Takaichi, in turn, praised Trump's role in promoting global stability.
In such a short period of time, the world has become more peaceful. I highly value President Trump's unwavering commitment to world peace and stability. I myself have been deeply impressed and inspired by you.
Before departing for South Korea on Wednesday, Trump is scheduled to meet with business leaders. In Seoul, he is expected to hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping in hopes of reaching a truce in the ongoing trade war between the world's two largest economies.
Still in Japan, a man accused of fatally shooting former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe admitted to murder at the opening of his trial 3 years after the assassination of Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister. 45-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami was arrested at the scene of the shooting in July 2022 after allegedly firing at Abe with a homemade gun while the former Prime Minister was giving a speech during an election campaign. Yamagami blamed Abe for promoting the Unification Church, a religious group he resented after his mother donated large sums of money to it, local media have said. A verdict is expected in January next year. The three-day ASEAN summit has wrapped up in Kuala Lumpur. On the final day, ASEAN and China upgraded their free trade pact, while the Philippines took over the 2026 chairmanship from Malaysia.
The 47th ASEAN Summit concludes today in Malaysia. The three-day event in Kuala Lumpur has delivered several key outcomes. In the frame of summit, Thailand and Cambodia signed a peace agreement to end a deadly border dispute. Timor-Leste become the 11th member of the bloc. Trade also took center stage, as the US and China struck a preliminary agreement to ease tensions. The summit included meetings with several of ASEAN's dialogue partners, including the United States, China, India, Japan, and Australia. Discussions ranged from economic and political issues. In the third day of summit, ASEAN and China signed an upgrade to their free trade agreement, which is expected to include sections on digital, green economy, and other new industries. China is seeking to intensify its engagement with ASEAN a region with a collective gross domestic product of $3.8 trillion.
We have just jointly witnessed the signing of the upgraded protocol for the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement 3.0, marking a new opportunity for expanding economic and trade cooperation mechanisms.
Complete uniformity of views is neither possible nor desirable, but I believe this appreciation for China's consistent and constructive engagement is shared.
The Philippines officially received the chairmanship of ASEAN for 2026. The handover from Malaysia marks the conclusion of its 2025 chairmanship.
During his trip to Asia, Donald Trump has once again hinted at the possibility of seeking a third term, despite the limits of the U.S. Constitution. Trump said he has not ruled out running for the White House again, but rejected the possibility of running for vice president in 2028.
I would love to do it. I have my best numbers ever. It's very terrible. I have my best numbers. You read it. Am I not ruling it out? You'll have to tell me. All I can tell you is that we have a great group of people, which they don't.
A light aircraft carrying tourists from Hungary and Germany crashed in Kenya, killing the 11 people on board. The airline, Mombasa Air Safari, confirmed there were no survivors, adding the plane was carrying 10 passengers, 8 Hungarians and 2 Germans. The captain was Kenyan. The Civil Aviation Authority said the accident happened at Kwale, near the Indian Ocean coast. The Netherlands is heading back to the polls on Wednesday for the third time in less than 5 years after a year of political turmoil. The vote remains highly unpredictable, as 2/3 of voters indicate they have not decided yet who they will vote for, according to Dutch media. Here's what to look out for in the election.
The Netherlands is heading back to the polls again. For the third time in less than 5 years, voters will elect a new parliament after months of political chaos and public frustration. Prime Minister Dick Scoof's government fell in June after far-right leader Geert Wilders pulled his Freedom Party out of the coalition, accusing his partners of blocking his plan to halt asylum migration. Now, Wilders' PVV remains the frontrunner, projected to win around 34 seats in the 150-member parliament. His campaign focuses on tightening immigration, closing borders, cutting foreign aid, and redirecting funds to healthcare and energy. Wilders has long been a controversial figure, known for his hardline stance on immigration and outspoken criticism of Islam. He has even been taken to court, facing charges of inciting hatred and discrimination due to his repeated calls for fewer Moroccans during the 2014 campaign. However, even if his party wins the most seats, forming a government will be a challenge. Major parties such as the Christian Democrats, the Liberal VVD and the left-wing Groen Links PVDA have ruled out working with him, leaving Wilders without clear partners for a coalition. Analysts suggest that some right-wing voters may switch their support to other parties that could form a viable government.
We have to see, of course, whether they swing away from Wilders, but reasons to stay away from that political party is because it's hardly acceptable as a coalition party in the next few years. It failed in the previous coalition, so quite some people will think we vote for a right-wing alternative that will maybe be part of the next coalition.
Voters' main concerns are clear: housing, healthcare and immigration. Nearly 2/3 of voters believe addressing the housing crisis should be a top priority, while healthcare remains a key issue for older citizens. Immigration continues to dominate national debate, often linked to housing shortages. The Groen Links PVDA alliance, led by former European Commissioner Frans Timmermans, is polling around 25 seats, with a focus on climate action, social equality and affordable housing. The Christian Democrats, under Henri Bontembal, are experiencing a resurgence, now polling close to 23 seats, promising stable governance and practical solutions for the housing crisis. The D66 party is gaining ground, boosted by former Climate Minister Rob Jetton. His upbeat, "Yes, we can" style message focuses on building more homes and investing in education. Jetton, a strong supporter of Europe and green policies, is seen as an outsider for Prime Minister. Dylan Yeşilgöz was once tipped to be the Netherlands' first female Prime Minister. But since her party's loss to Geert Wilders, the VVD leader has struggled to rebuild support. Polls now show the party heading for one of its worst results in decades. Yeşilgöz, who came to the Netherlands as a child refugee from Turkey, is campaigning to reduce migration. She's ruled out any future coalition with either Wilders or left-wing leader Frans Timmermans. With 27 parties on the ballot, no single group is expected to win a majority. This means coalition talks will be essential, though previous negotiations have shown that these talks can drag on for months. The last coalition formation took nearly 300 days. This election will not only determine who leads the country, but also whether the Netherlands can regain stability after a year of political upheaval.
Tensions between Georgia and European institutions have deepened once again after the Georgian delegation refused to attend the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly in Yerevan, a key EU Eastern Partnership forum. Our Nini Nikolaishvili reports.
The session in Yerevan gathered lawmakers and officials from across the Eastern Partnership to discuss issues central to the region's European integration, from human rights and energy security to economic convergence and education. Over 2 days, committees met to debate political affairs, legal harmonization and the alignment of national policies with the EU standards. But two key partners, Georgia and Azerbaijan, left their seats empty. Baku refused to join the assembly, accusing the European Parliament of undermining the fragile peace process with Armenia. Georgia's absence, however, carries different and in some ways deeper implications. In a formal letter to the Euronest Assembly, Levan Makhashvili, chair of Georgia's Committee on European Integration, said that the ruling team was concerned by the actions and rhetoric of some MEPs that, in his words, contradict the principles of partnership and mutual respect. He argued that Euronest had drifted from its founding purpose, turning into a space where political bias and misinformation overshadow the dialogue. Parliament Speaker Shavva Paposhvili went further, calling the event a farce and accusing the European side of inviting members of Georgia's opposition under the guise of civil society representatives. By doing so, he said, Euronest legitimizes radical actors and disrespects the will of the Georgian people. European officials in Yerevan, meanwhile, rejected that claim. Some members of European parliaments, including Poland's Krzysztof Brejza, said that Georgia's decision reflected a growing isolation from democratic Europe, insisting that Euronest remains a crucial platform for the Eastern Partnership's European future. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Turning to Central Asia, Finnish President Alexander Stubb is on an official visit to Astana, focusing on boosting economic ties, investments, and cooperation in green technologies and nuclear energy. Our Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
A ceremony at Akorda welcomed Finnish President Alexander Stubb on his first official visit to Kazakhstan, accompanied by a large business delegation representing over 20 leading Finnish companies. Kazakhstan and Finland have maintained close ties since Kazakhstan's independence. Finnish investments in Kazakhstan have reached $486.6 million over the past 2 decades, with around 70 Finnish-backed companies operating in the country. Kazakhstan accounts for nearly 90% of Finland's trade with Central Asia, with bilateral trade totaling $172 million last year. Finland mainly exports high-value goods, while Kazakhstan supplies raw materials. Helsinki views Kazakhstan as a key partner in renewable energy, green technologies, and rare earth metals. And on the sidelines of the visit, Kazakhstan's Nuclear Energy Agency Chairman Almasadam Satkaliyev discussed potential uranium supplies to Finnish nuclear plants. The two countries are also set to sign an agreement between nuclear regulators. Experts highlight that both nations share borders with Russia and say expanding trade and investment while adhering to international norms is increasingly significant in the current geopolitical climate. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan escalated after talks in Istanbul ended without an agreement. Both sides have very different accounts of what happened. Our Tamim Bahis has more in Kabul.
Negotiations between Pakistan and Afghanistan in Istanbul have ended without results, according to media reports from both sides, offering conflicting accounts. Afghan outlets claim that Pakistani delegation appeared disorganized and more focused on withdrawal than dialogue. They report that Pakistan asked for permission to conduct operations inside Afghanistan during TTP attacks and acknowledged for the first time an agreement with a foreign country allowing drone strikes in Afghan territory. Afghan sources warned that any future attacks from Pakistan would trigger a direct response, while stressing Kabul's commitment to dialogue. Pakistani media, meanwhile, described the talks as high stakes and said Islamabad presented a firm position, demanding that the Taliban end support for terrorist groups and take concrete steps to dismantle their networks. Pakistani sources accused the Afghan side of avoiding practical solutions and said progress depends on signing a proposed technical agreement. Neither side's account has been independently verified. As of now, the situation along the border and the prospects of renewed talks remain uncertain. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Azerbaijan is getting ready to host the Fly to Baku Art Weekend. The three-day festival will explore the themes of water and sustainability through exhibitions, performances, and educational programs. A News spoke with members of the Dance Ability group who will perform at the opening.
As far as I know, we will have artists and art professionals from about 30 countries, 50 people are joining to this festival. Fly to Baku, it's so inclusive. So we created inclusivity not only on this stage, but also we asked ourselves, does our performance it's accessible for all guests? So we created, we're gonna present like accessible tools, sign language interpretation. We will do the visual touch tour for people with visual impairment. So we're gonna be sure that the performance experience and the overall theater experience it's accessible for all people.
Our performance is important because it carries a message of inclusivity and environmental awareness. We want to show the audience that buying unnecessary clothes contributes to pollution. Instead, we can keep and cherish what we already have. Our clothes can hold memories and last for years. So if that's possible, why do we keep buying and producing more? It harms nature and the creatures living in the sea. That's the main message we want to share.
This festival brings together so many different people and creates a space for connection. Through our performance, we can share the meaning behind our work and inspire the audience to think and question things. As a team, we're really happy to be part of Fly to Baku. It allows us to connect with so many people.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned to A News.